Holy shike, let's talk about pigs. Here's your host of the Pork Podcast, Jennifer Shike.
There's just something about the story behind the story. And as a storyteller, I'm always searching for ways to give readers just a little bit more. And that's what the Pork Podcast is all about, bringing you stories of the people and the progress of the pork industry. I'm Jennifer Shike. Let's go find just a little bit more. Well, I first met today's guest at the Ohio Pork Congress a few years ago, an impressive pig farmer and industry advocate who's well known for his sustainable farming practices and his relentless pursuit of doing the right thing. His friends define him as never doing anything partway. If he is in, he's all in. But it's only been within the past year that I've gotten to know the real story of Duane Stateler, the story behind the busy calendar and the impressive resume, the story of an unassuming multi-generational Ohio farmer who has fought everything from bad markets to animal rights activists and even cancer to make him what he is today, stronger and more determined to succeed. Well, welcome to the Pork Podcast, Duane. We're so excited that you're here today to share your story with us.
Thank you, Jennifer. It's an honor to be here with you.
Well, if I'm honest, your story is one that gives me goosebumps every time I hear it. But before we get into your story, I'd love to know, how did you even get started raising pigs? When did you know that you wanted to be a farmer?
Well, I grew up on our farm that had always had pigs for 3 generations at least before me that I know of for sure. And started out in the barns helping Dad. Of course, that was back in the very early 60s, late 50s. Of course, that was pre-farrowing stalls or anything like that. It was just an open pen and a pasture lot and feeding out in barns. So that's where I got my start. That's where I got my love. And that led to, having my own pigs to show at the fair. And when I was, I think, a sophomore in high school through my FFA project, I built my own farrowing house so I could have my own pigs. And then I started doing my crossbreeding and then getting the gilts around for Dad. So that's how it all began.
Incredible. What was your favorite? Did you have a favorite breed or did you show crossbred pigs?
It sort of determined what I had. I was making crossbred for the farm. Had Chester White, George Corn Chester Whites was only 2 miles from me. And of course, people came from all over the US to come to his sales, and I would help them with the sales some. But so that was my mother breed, and I would use Hamp and Duroc to breed with them. And that's where I got my crosses and our genetics for our farm at that time.
Well, we sure love some Chester Whites at our house. That's been kind of our favorite breed to show, or one of our favorite breeds for sure. I definitely have a daughter who insists they're the best for sure. So kind of an interesting little twist in your story. About a mile from where you grew up, a 750 sow unit went up when you were in your 20s. So how does that little bit of history tie into your story as a pig farmer?
Well, it was that went up about 1978, about the time I got married, and it came into the area. And it was 4 neighbors that had went together, and they were going to get pigs out of it. And along with them, the banker got involved, and he thought he'd be a 5th partner in it. So that went on, and it went on for about 4 or 5 years. Matter of fact, when Margie and I got married, we moved and we bought modular farrowing and nursery, moved them over to my place, and so I emptied the old farrowing house. Well, Dad, he was getting the pigs that weren't quite ready to make it for to go out as feeder pigs. So he took over the old farrowing house at the age of 60 and started running those pigs on his own to add with our pigs. So that's how that came into existence. And then all of a sudden, the president of the bank was caught in a check kiting scheme with another bank. And the feds came in and called the notes within 48 hours. And that led to the bankruptcy of 2 of my 4 neighbors. And so then that site was eventually going to come up for sale. And we were 150 sows farrow to finish, and knew that times were changing and we wanted to get into where we got big enough where we could contract all of our own hogs and stuff on a production level to sort of cushion ourselves a little bit. So the thought was that we go buy that.
But you thought you were going to buy the sow unit, and then something put you on a different path. Tell us what happened right about that same time that was up for sale.
Well, the day that we were going to go meet with Ag Credit, that morning I came in from doing chores and Margie came in the bathroom. I was towel drying my hair and she's noticed a little lump in the bottom of my armpit. And she says, "What is that?" And I says, "I don't know. I don't know what you're talking about." "Well, haven't you felt it?" And I said, "No." And it was about half the size of a ping pong ball. And I was going to the FSA office that day, and she says, "You have to stop in and see Dr. Miller." So I stopped in to see Dr. Miller, and through the events of that morning, ended up at the hospital to get an ultrasound. And that little dimple that we saw coming out of my skin ended up being a tumor that was the size of a Nerf football at that time. And so they did a biopsy, and we got all that done. And I still made the appointment at Ag Credit, and we were okay to go ahead and maybe make our chance to buy that sow unit. And but we didn't know what was coming with the test yet. That was on a Thursday. Monday, we got the results back for the test and found that it was a malignant tumor, and it was going to have to come out. And so that led to a whole event of things that happened over the next couple of weeks. And so it was God's way of telling me that now's not the time to go buy that unit. So we didn't. It ended up selling for about 22, 23 cents on the dollar. So, but God had other plans for me.
Sure did. How old were you at that time again?
I was 28.
28.
I was 28, and we had Anthony was not quite 4, and Margie was 5 months pregnant with a tubular pregnancy with our youngest son, Brandon.
Hmm. That was a really, I can't even imagine what your wife went through during that time. How did she manage all of that? That was a lot for her to carry. Did you guys have family close by who helped you through that time, or what were some things that helped you guys get through all those challenges?
Well, being rural, of course, mom and dad were only about 4 mile away, and then her mom and dad were only about 6 mile away the other direction. So everything was, pretty well close together. And of course, we didn't know just what the events were going to bring forward for us. We sort of muddled through that weekend and got on to where we got the actual results back on that Monday afternoon. And Dr. Miller called me and says, "You need to be in Columbus tomorrow morning at 10:30. It's the only doctor in the United States that will even see your case. He just happens to be down here at Ohio State." What I had was a chondrosarcoma. There was only about 10 to 12 cases of it a year. It was very rare kind of disease, a large bone disease, basically found in people over the age of 60 in their hip, because it was either in the pelvic or in the shoulder blade, that type of a cancer. And so that's what we found that we had. And so we ended up going down to Ohio State and met with a doctor on Tuesday. And he wanted to put me in the hospital. And he did surgeries at 2 different hospitals. And 1 week was at one hospital, 1 week was at the other. And he said, "Well, I'm going to put you in the hospital, but the surgery schedule's full. So if we don't get to you by Friday, we'll move you over to the other hospital so we can do it first thing Monday morning." And I said, "Doc, have you really got a problem? Is this life threatening that I have to be in the hospital?" And he sort of took back and looked at me. He says, "No." I says, "I still have a lot of work to do at home." I says, "If you'll just let me do that surgery on Monday," I says, "I'll go back home and come back down when you want me to." He looked at me and he says, "All right, I need you down here Friday by noon so I can get all the tests run for to do the surgery on Monday. So if you'll do that, you go on back home and get your work done." So that's what I did.
I'm not surprised. On now that I know you, I'm not surprised at all that you found a way to get your job done or get things tidied up the best you could at home before going through that. And within, I guess, was it about 2 years that you decided to sell and to make some changes? What happened in the summer of 1986?
In the summer of 1986, I found a buyer. I still kept on, raising pigs, and we found a buyer that was willing to buy our 2 modular buildings. I knew if I just quit and let them sit empty, they would deteriorate. And there was a gentleman that had a 750 sow unit down by Marysville, and he was wanting to go all in and all out. So he bought my 12 sow farrowing and my 12 pen nursery, and they picked him up and moved him down there, and that's what he added that into his operation. So at that time, I was out of the pigs. My Wayne feed salesman, he'd already asked me when that time came, his dad wanted all my breeding stock. So I sold them the breeding stock, and that was the end of hogs for us for about 20 years.
How did that feel for you to be out of the pig business? I mean, I know you kept busy farming and you also had another side gig that you worked on as well. So I guess what was it like for you during that period without pigs? And I guess how did that feel?
It just sort of changed a little bit. I didn't have chores to do every morning, that was dependent on everything. But I ended up doing electrical work. Dad had always done electrical work, and that was a major part of my 4-H projects and stuff, and even in my FFA of electrification, because I always worked some with him in the off season. I was the one that got the attic job or the crawl space job because him and a neighbor, they did rewiring of old farmhouses and stuff. And so that's where I cut my teeth in it. And I had a gentleman in town that was building new homes, and he asked me if I, with what happened, if I would be willing to wire some homes. So over the next 20 years, I wired about 160 new homes in the area, new homes and small businesses, anywhere from an $80,000 home to multi-million-dollar homes.
Wow, that's incredible. I had no idea that you had that as your side. I don't really think that sounds like a side gig. I think that sounds like a full-time job. Like you had 2 full-time jobs during that time. And you were raising a family.
That's pretty much how it was. Yeah.
Oh, geez.
There was no rest for the weary.
No. No one says you like to rest. I think I've been told that you don't sleep very much at night either, and that you maybe get 3 or 4 hours of sleep, maybe 5 on a good night is what a little somebody told me along the way.
Well, there's several people know my routine, so you could have asked a few people that would know that, but
Yeah.
they're correct.
Yeah. Well, we'll get into that in a little bit when I do my research about you. But I want to move into this conversation that you had with your son. So you were talking to Anthony, and something he said really changed the trajectory of where your life was heading. So what was that conversation?
Well, Anthony had went off farm to work, and I did the same thing when I was young. Dad sort of wanted me to get an idea of what the rest of the world was like before I really made up my decision on what I was going to do. And Anthony had done the same thing. And it was about 2002, he came to me and he says, "Dad, I really want to follow your footsteps and farm." And I says, "Okay, if we're going to do that, we're going to have to diversify somehow." And he was the one that brought it up. He said, "Well, I'm open if you are to get back into the pigs." And he was only, like I said, he was only, 4 years old. We've got pictures of him in the farrowing house, and helping some things at a young age. But after the age of about 5.5, they were here no more. And, but he said he would do that. Of course, the industry had changed in 20 years. And so we pursued, looking into the contract hog business. That was a way to bring him back on. I said, my agreement is we'll go in with this together and we'll put these buildings up. And I said, you keep your off-farm job. We'll put all the money back into it. And when it's paid, you can come home and then you won't have to worry about whether we get rain or we don't get rain or we've got a bad year in the crops. That way you'll have something for your family. And so that's what we did.
How did
We
that?
entered in with Horde Family Farms on a contract grower.
Mhm. So, how did it feel to get back into the business again? Did you ever think you'd see that day?
I never dreamed I would see that day, and I'll never forget when we got that first semi load of pigs in the barn. Uh, Anthony had his first child was about 9 months old, and she was just walking with a little bit of steadiness if someone held her hand. And Andrea got her out there in the pen with those wean pigs that was there, and that's a moment that I will never forget. That I never thought we'd be back in there again. And here we are back in the business. And I looked at Anthony. I said, "Well, there's no turning back now. We've got too much invested." I said, "You better like this."
We will be right back after this message from our sponsor. Hey, I'm visiting with Elanco Swine Technical Consultant, Dr. Jessica Risser today. Welcome to the Pork Podcast.
Thanks for having me, Jennifer.
Well, Elanco is bringing a new swine respiratory disease injectable to the market. Can you tell me a little bit about Predilex?
Yeah, so Predilex was approved earlier this year by the FDA for treatment of swine respiratory disease. It's the first unique injectable antibiotic that's been approved by the FDA in some time. Predofloxacin is the active ingredient, and it's a novel third-generation fluoroquinolone. And fluoroquinolone would be the antibiotic class in which Predilex fits into.
Well, that's exciting news. So tell us, what are some of the pathogens that Predilex is labeled for?
Yeah, that's a great question, because here in the United States, veterinarians are required by the FDA to instruct producers to use fluoroquinolones. Again, that's the antibiotic class that Predilex falls into, as labeled. So it's important for producers and veterinarians to understand what that label is and those pathogen indications listed. So it's for swine respiratory disease caused by 5 swine respiratory disease pathogens: Bordetella bronchoseptica, Glasserella parasuis, Pasteurella maltacida, Streptococcus suis, and Mycoplasma pneumoniae, in nursery, growing, and finishing pigs intended for slaughter. Now, that could be boars, gilts, sows, but they are intended for slaughter. It's not for use in swine intended for breeding. And I just want to make that clarification because it is listed on the label. We did not do the reproductive safety studies for use in breeding animals. So the FDA did have us put that on the label, that it's not for sows, boars, replacement gilts, intended for breeding or nursing piglets.
Thanks for that clarification. You know, as a veterinarian, what excites you the most about Predilex?
Yeah, first and foremost, it's thinking about the clients and the producers and the ease of administration of Predilex. Like I said, it's labeled for most bacterial swine respiratory pathogens from pigs post-weaning all the way through to market. And it also has on the label a withdrawal time of only 2 days. So it really makes it a convenient product for swine respiratory disease from the time the pig is weaned for treatment of that piglet through to market, and with one product in the barn. It only requires one treatment as well, and the concentration of predofloxacin, the active ingredient, is higher than other fluoroquinolones. So the volume of the dose is smaller, so that then it's only requiring one injection for those pigs from weaning to market.
Well, it's always great to have more tools in the toolbox. And again, thank you so much for joining us today on the Pork Podcast.
Thank you.
Well, and I mean, let's be honest, you came back at a really interesting time in Ohio pork history. What was it like raising pigs in the 2000s in Ohio? Can you share some of those challenges that you were up against at that time in your state in particular?
Well, we got the building went up, and it was when we had gotten through and we got looked around and decided who we were going to go with and stuff. Why the first pigs came in there in March of 2006, and of course this is, I think, the Florida ballot initiative had happened, and activists were starting to come after agriculture, and I'm thinking, my gosh, here we are making a big move forward to try to make this multi-generational and to carry the farm on. And now we've got all these people that think that we're doing something that, we're really not doing what they say. So that sort of intrigued me. And Pat had knew that, Pat Horton knew that I wanted to get started and get this adventure to try to keep Anthony on the farm and even generations after Anthony. And so there was a spot came open on the Ohio Pork Board, and Pat came to me, him and Matt Davis, and they said, "We'd really like you to get involved in the pork board." And so that's what started my adventure and getting a little bit of advocacy started to try to preserve what I thought we were safe in doing and still do feel very much safe in doing. That there's nothing that we do on our farm that is not fit to be done, because I was taught by Grandpa that, you've got to protect this land. You've got to take care of this land because they're not making any more of it. That was always drilled into me by my father and my grandfather from a young age.
Now, I think that if I were you, stepping into that realm of, kind of going up against some of those animal activists that you had to have discussions with, we'll put it that way. What was that like for you to all of a sudden, kind of be pushed out there as a voice for not only your state, but also US pig farming? Was it something you were comfortable with? Was it an easy transition? Or, what was that like for you?
Well, I didn't think that there wasn't anybody. I never felt there wasn't anybody that I could convince that what I am doing is nothing bad, because we're just doing what we've been taught to do and what other farmers do. And, they just, it came to me very clear right away that, I started realizing, gosh, there's an awful lot of people that I've taken for granted that are 4 and 5 generations removed from a farm, and they have no idea. Everybody had the idea that this farm is like what you would see in Charlotte's Web or Old MacDonald, and taking them back into the 50s. And I had to get across to them that, the places and the businesses that you work at, are they the same today as what they were 30 years ago? Well, our farm isn't the same today as what it was 30 years ago. We've changed a lot, and it's been all to the good, because it's all through making things better, not only for us, but also for the animals that we care for.
You really do have a unique perspective. It's interesting, taking that break and then coming back. It seems like that probably even brought some of those differences to light in an even bigger way for you than if you had been farming, raising pigs that whole time. Very interesting. Well, part of my work, as this part is coming, is that I go talk to a couple people who know you to find out a little bit more about the story behind the story with you. And so I had to, of course, go talk to Brian Humphreys, who was a guest of ours a couple weeks ago. But he brought up a really interesting point. He said that you helped hire him twice back when he was an executive director at Ohio Pork Council, and then you were recently involved when he became CEO of the National Pork Producers Council. So it's pretty cool that you're going to have an opportunity to work with him in both of his roles, and he gets access to work with you as well. But he shared that one of the things that you and your family did such a great job demonstrating was what modern farming practices were to the influencers. You guys did a few tours a year that turned into a few weeks, he said, and then or a few tours in a week, and then sometimes even a few tours in a day. So he said what started out as like this one-time deal, maybe once or twice a year, became maybe once or twice a day. So that's pretty crazy. And he applauds you that your efforts really helped change the narrative with community groups about livestock agriculture. And goodness knows, I know that pig farmers don't have easy days and that you guys are incredibly busy. So why did you keep hosting tours? Why did you get involved and say yes to that when it was such a big time demand?
Well, I felt it was important that so many people that don't know what we do to see what we do, and that was, so you just have to open up. There wasn't anything, we haven't done anything we were afraid of. At the time of the demonstration farm where we started that, I will tell you that it was just a little bit, we were hoping that everything we were doing was right, because when they put testing equipment that when they're looking for something in your water that's testing every bit of water that comes out of your tile and every bit of water that runs off the surface of that ground, there was some questions about that, especially when we're applying manure right up within 5 feet of the testing equipment. But after we got the first year's results, we were safe. We found out that we aren't doing anything bad. And matter of fact, we're just as good, if not a little bit better than what some of the commercial fertilizer operators are. So that was a relief in that aspect. So then it was just no holds barred. I mean, we could go and we could show anybody and tell anybody anything. You speak with Brian. I don't know whether he mentioned to you, but I know one of the tours, it was one of the times that he was there was a lady we could only take about 20 into our viewing room at a time. And there was a lady that was standing out there, and she was telling everybody how she was just going to tell that farmer what she really thought of this pig operation he had here. And Brian was just a witness, and he was there. So he followed the group in. And once she got in front of the viewing window and saw that nursery room full of baby pigs, she just melted. He did ask me a very good question about feed. I didn't know anything about this ahead of time until Brian told me that just changed her tune when she got in there and saw those baby pigs afterwards. But we've opened up. I think Farm Bureau said we've had over 4,000 visitors to our farm, and that has ranged anywhere from activists to other farmers, to the governor's been here. We've had all the state representatives from the Ohio state legislature and even from the federal legislature. They've been here to the farm to tour to see where we've been at. So of course, COVID sort of shut that down for a while, but we're back to where we've had about 4 or 5 tours a year here the last 2 or 3 years. Not as much as what it was at the beginning, but we still have people coming, and we're still an open door and an open book.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. My children I have one in college now and my high school son. I mean, they both have just shared how important it is for people to open up their doors, because we can have people come out and come look at our little operation with a dozen pigs. That's not real modern pig farming. I mean, it's better than nothing, and we're always happy to let their friends see it, to let other kids see it. But, I think it just has struck them as they've gotten older, just how important it is for operations like yours to open the doors when it's possible, to let people come in to see it, because they listen to what some of their friends say when they see pictures of modern pig farms today, or when they go by one on the road, and people just don't know when they can't see, right? It can be a little intimidating. And so it makes me have an even greater appreciation for what you and others do to demystify, to open doors, to help people learn.
Yeah, I did sort of give Anthony a little bit of an evening there that one night he was loading hogs, and we had people up to the nursery, and they said, "What's going on down there?" And I said, "Well, they're loading hogs." So I took the Kiwanis Club from Toledo, Ohio, down there, and they were standing outside, and Anthony observed they were out there, and he says, "Well, I hope nothing goes wrong." But it was surprising. They thought, what Anthony thought, this would sound like an awful lot when you have pigs running on doing an aluminum trailer and stuff. They were surprised at how easy everything moved and stuff. So it you can't be afraid, because a lot of people understand what goes on. But it was a good thing for them, because I think they took that back to a lot of people, that there's nothing that happens there that that they aren't afraid to show us. So I think that's a help also.
Yeah, I think that's a great piece of advice, that we just can't be afraid to go out and try those things and to share. Well, so obviously things are going well in your life. It seems like, you're kind of back at it, or operating at full speed ahead, but you faced another personal hurdle back in 2016. And all of a sudden you found yourself in a situation where you were losing strength in your hands, and you were struggling to be able to use your hands. Can you tell us what happened?
Well, it was really coming on over time, and they thought it was carpal tunnel. So I had the carpal tunnel surgeries, the small ones, and then the major ones on my hands. But I kept losing the ability, to use my hands. Matter of fact, it got so bad there towards the the spring of 2016 that I couldn't even put it was all I could do to put a 3/4 inch nut on a 3/4 inch bolt. I couldn't use the dexterity, didn't have the feeling. Uh, all that stuff was going on. So they did start doing a deeper dive. They'd done electrolysis and stuff. And finally, they did a complete CT scan and they found out that part of C3 and C4 had deteriorated to the point that it was collapsing on my nerves. And so the doctors down at Ohio State went in and they sort of made a trapeze around 3 sides of my spine to take the pressure off and jack my head up. But what was discovered was there was something on the inside of my spine. They had never seen anything like it. To look at the CT scan, it just looks like you went around the inside of my spine with bright white paint, and it just glowed in the scan X-rays. And they were able to get a sample of it, and they've never seen it before, and they've never seen it since. They sort of gave it a name that I can't remember what it is, but they think it was sort of a mastation between the cancer that I had 20 some years before then, 30 years, I guess, closer to 30 years before then, that had caused it. And they couldn't find anything that would take care of it. So they just sort of devised up this method that we're going to try treating it with steroids to see if that will stop, because whatever it was in the inside of my spinal column was eating and destroying my spinal fluid, which was giving me problems on, not only was I losing it in my hands, I was starting to lose it in my feet. Well, everything was sort of scrunching together. So that started in a series of spinal injections that went on for about 4.5 years.
That is a lot to process. I can't even imagine having so many unknowns like that. And steroids aren't very fun, are they? In 2022, you decided that you needed to make a change. So tell us about a really big change that took place in your life then.
Well, I was thinking about I needed to change, and Rob Brenneman had told me about a protein type diet and bacon and what he'd found with some doctors. And one thing I found very intriguing was he had done it, and he was telling me that Shar and him had went to a doctor that think they needed to get their blood checked, and he didn't want to do it because he said my blood is fine. And so they went to this gentleman and they got the blood tests, and sure enough, his blood work was all fine. And that was a thing that convinced me that this might work. So this was in the summer of 22, and I'm thinking about this. I'm not saying anything to anybody. And I'm thinking about this. And that fall, when I found myself sitting, and we had long lines at the elevator that fall, I'm researching all this stuff on a protein, the bacon diet, and all sorts of things. And different doctors, Rob had sent me a whole bunch of information from some medical doctors that had went in on this. And I don't know the names as well as what Rob does. I've got their stuff saved on my phone. But anyhow, it was intriguing. And I had come to the conclusion. I told Margie, I said, I am done with this and I'm going to try this. And so I said something to the doctors, and they said that was fine. It was my decision. And so I stopped. They said, no, there's going to be a little bit of withdrawal time with you not having these injections. I said, okay. So I made up my mind I was going to start whenever that withdrawal time was done. Well, come Christmas Eve, I made that decision the 1st of November. Come Christmas Eve, that's when the withdrawal hit. And I can remember it lasted for a good 3 weeks or so, because the board was supposed to go down and see the Beagle Brigade in Atlanta, Georgia. And that Saturday night, I didn't know whether I was going to get on the plane or not Sunday morning. And I did go ahead and get on the plane. And when I got back, I was feeling just pretty doggone good. So that's when I started in on the protein diet. And I didn't tell any doctors what I was going to do, family doctor or any of the doctors down at OSU. I just did this myself, and knew we were going to have a whole bunch of tests done in June, because it was time for checkup and they were going to keep their eye on me. And so I just was going to see what happened. Well, when I went back in June, I had already lost about 60 some pounds. And the question came, what was I doing? And I said, until you tell me how my blood tests are, I'm not telling you a doggone thing. And I was a person, and they had me on blood pressure medicine. I was on cholesterol medicine. I was on several other different medications. And when I stopped it all. I had one of the things I'd made up my mind is through all my trials and everything I've been through, I had seen the birth of a son. I'd seen graduations. I'd seen weddings. I'd seen grandchildren. So I had lived a pretty full life, and I was ready to do whatever I could, but I wanted to enjoy myself as I finished out my time. And so that's what I kept in my heart. And I knew God was guiding me, or he wouldn't answer my prayers to give me the idea to go ahead and do this. And so when they came back with the blood test, they just could not believe it. They said, you are perfect on 37 out of 38. He said, the only thing of it is you might be a half point too high on your good cholesterol. And that had happened in just 5 months time. So it was pretty much of a telling story that I was doing something right.
Yeah. And I mean, we just want to make a disclaimer, because we both said we're not trying to advocate that this needs to be a diet we're telling everybody they need to do. But man, it's a diet that has been an incredible blessing in your life so far. It really turned things around for you. And your friend, Rob Brenneman, who I did reach out to talk to, he was just sharing how he was on a similar health journey and it was up against needing to lose weight and struggling to be able to keep it off. And he said that, bacon really helped cure his sugar cravings when he began following the carnivore diet. And he remembers talking to you about it when you were getting started. And he just wanted me to share with you that he has a lot of appreciation and respect for what you've been through. And I'm so glad that you feel better and that you've been able to lose that weight that was holding you back. What has this taught you, I guess, about protein? Because you've taken some pretty big protein lessons away from it. And I think that's valuable information to be able to share, especially in light of this time we're in where they're trying to say that plant protein may be able to like sneak in and be added or be, a substitute for animal protein. I think you would argue animal protein is pretty necessary, huh?
Yes, one of the things I learned in my research is there were a couple doctors, and I didn't realize this, that when we eat lettuce and vegetables, a lot of the vegetables and lettuce and things like that, greens is what people would classify it as. The metabolism that's made up in there, our body is not our digestion system is not made to make that into something we can use. Now, an animal that has a rumen in it breaks down that cell base and puts it into a protein and meat that our body can use. And the fat that we find in the muscle is a good fat. That's not saying the fat on the back fat of a pig is not necessarily all good, but all your cellulose fat that's in the muscle is things our body require. And one of the biggest things I found is if I can have 6 or 8 strips of bacon, I have absolutely no desire for any kind of sugar. And it also is, I learned that was a very good thing for diabetics because it really provides extra for the help of their insulin with that also was one of the things that I found out from the doctors and my research and everything on it. So I'm not saying that this is for everybody, but I can tell you that it does help. And Margie can make the cookies for the grandkids and trot out the cakes and the ice cream and everything. And I have absolutely no cravings for it. None whatsoever. Doesn't bother me one bit.
Oh, incredible. And I mean, timing is good because You need to have all of your strength about you right now, don't you? Because you're in a pretty big role serving the U.S. pork industry. You are going to be starting to take over as president of the National Pork Producers Council next year. Talk to me a little bit about some of your hopes and your dreams for your year serving as president and what's really one of the biggest roles in our industry.
Well, I think I've always been a part of an open book. There's nothing that I've done that I'm ashamed of, or anything that that I didn't learn lessons from. The mistakes I've made, I've learned from them and tried to to do better the next time. But through that all, I have found that open honesty, as far as even on things where you might find disagreements, you can find common ground on sharing your beliefs. And we've got an industry that has changed a lot in my lifetime, and has changed a lot even in the last few years. And as we get bigger, we've got people and organizations and producers that are getting bigger than what some companies are now. And as we move forward, I think it's important to remember where our roots are from, and also for us to share the stories of what NPPC does behind the scenes. I don't think it will hurt to share some of the stories amongst our other producers. I don't think it's good that we get that stuff, our intents and our goals and our wishes and our directions we're having necessarily out into, the general public, because we don't want to tip off people that would rather see us out of business than something else. But I think it's time to open up with producers and share a little bit more, take them inside of what it's like to be in the NPPC board. And I hope we're able to do that. And we've got a staff that is tremendous. And I hope that I can help with the rest of the board to convey that to our producers and earn their credit, because we need every producer going in one direction in order to protect this, in order for us to have the ability to pass it on to our heirs and to continue to raise good protein for consumers to have.
Well, I think that's so well said. And I'm very excited to see you flourish in that role. I'm grateful for all the hard work that you and the rest of the team have put in this year. You guys have had a big year. There's been a lot of work that you've done to carry out important messages for the U.S. pork industry. And I just want to say thank you for your authenticity. I think your authenticity makes you very special and unique, and really draws people to you. And I think we need more people who are willing to be a little bit transparent and a little bit vulnerable in sharing their story for the greater good of our industry. And I just want to say thank you for doing that. And I just want to say thank you for joining us today. You can dive into more of the Pork Podcast on Farm Journal's YouTube channel and listen to it anywhere podcasts are found. Again, I'm Jennifer Scheich, finding the story behind the story.